Stacey, and we're recording. And I have some questions I wanted to ask Stacey that I've actually wanted to know the answers to as we've worked on this project over the last year. But the first thing I wanted to do was ask Stacey to talk about her trajectory, which is interesting, from lawyer to painter.
So first I want to thank everybody for coming. I know it's like terrible weather out there, and for participating on Zoom. And I will just start. So I was a lawyer. I had practiced for about 25 years. And as I approached a certain age, I started to realize that my life was soon to change pretty dramatically because my kids were going to school, and I was thinking about how I wanted to envision my life. And, you know, I did spend a lot of time being a lawyer, but I spent even more time being a mother. So I wanted to make sure that it was something I was like really, really passionate about. And so I started to think about different things that I could do to like fulfill that. And I've always painted. The last bunch of years that I've been working, I've worked part-time, and I've always spent one day painting. And so I decided to take a class, a workshop at a school that I've always wanted to go to in Manhattan. It's a graduate program. And so I took this workshop, and it was mostly attended by students who were in like getting a master's in fine art. And I was like so overwhelmed at this in this workshop. And I mean, I'm sorry, what was the school? So it was the New York Academy of Art. And I was so overwhelmed, like I didn't even know like how to properly wash my brushes. Like I knew nothing about different painting methods, contemporary artists. It was just so overwhelming. And the instructor had us all paint, like we went from nothing to painting. It was a you know, a weekend long workshop on huge canvases. And I came home from that first day, and I literally looked like a truck had run me over. I had paint everywhere. I was like such a mess, but I was determined to learn something. And so I finished the workshop and realized that there was so much I didn't know, that I had been painting for all these years and I didn't know anything about painting. So I took another workshop, and then I started to think again about my life and realized that I really wanted to paint, and the only way I was going to become a proficient painter was to do it full time. So I thought about, you know, quitting the law, and it was very hard, as you can imagine, because being a lawyer after 25 years is just sort of who I was. And I would talk about it with my kids, and my daughter said to me, one of my daughters said, "Well, Mom, you've done that for 25 years. It's time to do something else." And it was just such a fresh perspective, like without the baggage of like, oh, this is who I am. It was just, yeah. And it made me realize that I could just make that change. And I did, and took more classes, and then decided to go back to that school full time. I got a certificate of fine arts from that school, and have been painting, you know, full time ever since, which is not that long ago, but you know, yeah.
Yeah. And I was curious, when you quit your job, what did you tell your boss?
Oh, so yeah, it was you know, it was like I was determined to quit my job before I turned 50. So it got, and I kept thinking about it. I got to do it. I got to do it. I got to do it. And it got to the point where it was the week before I was going to turn 50. And I was like, I can't do it. And my husband was away on business, and I was like, I have nobody to like get me over the finish line and tell me like, you got to do it, you got to do it. And I called like a good friend, my friend Lisa, another Lisa, and she's like, go in there right now and do it, do it. So I was like, okay, I did. And I walked in and I sat down to the, I was working at the City University of New York in their general counsel's office. And I walked into the deputy general counsel's office and I sat down. I was like, I have something to tell you. And I just started crying. And she was like, oh my God, like somebody died, like what is it? And, you know, and she started crying. We were like crying. And I, you know, and it was all good. It was all good. Yeah, so I told her, I mean, she was very happy. Everybody was surprised and happy and have been, you know, following me along in my career. And so, yeah, it's all good.
I think changing, you know, jumping off a cliff, as it were, you know, changing your job is so, it's like a fantasy for lots of people. I mean, people rooting for people who totally change what they're doing. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think people say to me like, oh, you're so lucky you got out of the law, you know,
but
I liked it a lot. And I had a very fulfilling career every step of the way. And it wasn't, I don't regret it for a minute. You know, sometimes I think, yeah, I'd be further along in my artistic career, but it's all good. Like that was it. I had a really fulfilling experience in my last job. I loved too. And the people there, you know, it was hard. And as you leave, you know, one career and pick up something else, I mean, I think you realize you don't see anything that was wrong with what you were doing. You know, it's all like great. And I realized so much, like how much I learned and how much I meant to the people that I worked with and worked for. So, you know, it's hard, and it's not like helpful to keep looking back on what you're not doing anymore and just focus on what you are doing. So.
Okay. All right. So that brings us to what you're doing now in this room, which is you painted a show and photographed a show called The Victory Farmers. You are a charter member of the Victory Farmers. I'll just really quickly explain what the Victory Farmers are. So I organized this project. I own a little restaurant in Larchmont called the Grange, and at the beginning of COVID, we were trying to open. We were supposed to open in March of 2020. So that didn't happen. And in that, and I was, you know, we were all locked in our houses, as you guys probably remember. And I read a story in the New York Times about a group of people on a block in Rhode Island who each planted a Victory garden style garden. So for people who don't know what Victory Gardens, where that comes from, it was in during World War II in England. People planted these food gardens in their backyards to feed themselves and feed others in the neighborhood. And it was a kind of a resilience, you know, move. So these families were planting these gardens so that they could see one another outside, socially distanced, you know, still have a community, even though we were all really isolated in our homes. So I sent an email to, I've lived here in this town for a while, and I sent an email to 40 people, Stacey was one, and said, would you be interested in participating in a project like this? Everybody could grow a garden, and we'll figure out somebody to donate what we grow, an organization to grow. So the first year, 40 people said yes. Stacey was among them, and your daughter. And we began donating food to the Larchmont Mamaroneck Hunger Task Force, which is an amazing organization. And the second year, we grew to 140 families. The library participates, churches, temple, Celebrate Nature Center. And we donated hundreds of pounds of produce last summer. And at a certain point last summer, you came to me and said,
yeah, so I guess I'll take it from here. So I mean, first of all, I like I guess when I first moved to Larchmont and got a house, not the house we live in now, I planted a garden and loved it and got really into gardening, growing vegetables, perennials. And then when I moved to this house we live in now, I didn't bring my garden with me because the house, the back of it was like too shady for a garden, and I was just focusing on other things. And then I got this email from Lisa, and I just loved this idea of doing it with people in the community and donating our vegetables, and also just to have a community to talk about gardening with. I mean, Lisa was like, okay, this is the garden bed you need to buy, this is what you need to do for fertilizer, this is what you need to do. And I was like, yeah, I need somebody to tell me what to do. And so I planted the garden, and I'll come back to the garden, but the idea of doing these portraits of the farmers came to me, and it's interesting like how ideas kind of percolate and how they come to fruition. It's like it's never just one thing, really. It's just like a amalgamation of so many things. And one of them is obviously my love of gardening and my love of specifically of this project, which I think is such a wonderful community project, especially at a time when people were so isolated. It was during COVID, and people were just like living their own life and not living a community life. And this was a way to live to do something community oriented, but still be like safe, and so that's why I loved this idea. But also I for many years have been thinking about the idea of farming in our country, and going to Europe and driving around in Europe. When you drive from place to place, you see along the sides of the road there are farms everywhere, farms. Here, not so. And I started to think about how farming is something that we should be doing on a small scale, not just these big, agricultural, companies that grow everything. And I've just been thinking about that a lot. And I finished my my program, my school, and I needed a project. And I wanted a project, not just to like continue to do like some still lifes and like this and that. I wanted a project to really occupy me. And I just came up with this idea. I mean, my husband Rob thinks he came up with the idea, but I think I came up with the idea. But of like, well, what about doing these portraits of the farmers who are doing this? Because I think I'm a portrait artist mostly, and I like to do portraits, but I also really like landscapes, and I like to do still lifes. And this, for artistically, had everything. And then it had a social purpose, which gave it more meaning, and it gave it like a thread, that all of these paintings can be connected. And I talked to Lisa about it, and she just loved the idea, and she was so supportive, which I so appreciate. And then I thought like, well, I'm going to apply for a grant. I'm going to get money to do this because it's such a great community project. And then, it'll be good. It'll be good. So I found out about the potential of getting money, and I talked to the library about having the exhibit here, which just made sense, and they were supportive. And then, I was like, okay, I'm going to write this grant, which I had never done. And I did it, and I got the grant. And then I said, oh no, I really got to do this project now. And not only that, I had to do it within a pretty like confined time period. And so it was very stressful. I only had like a year. And so that was hard, but it also was a motivator, right? Because I just had to paint, I had to like not go on trips and not like go to lunch with my friends. I just had to paint, and it was great to be so focused, like to have something that is really focused. And I just think that this project is so just lovely for, I mean, and I thought like, oh, well, what's so nice about the timing of it is that I'll have this exhibit and this artist talk and COVID will be over, but no. So I don't know, it's kind of like more poignant in some ways, right? Because it just continues, but we remember that we have this wonderful community. So
Do you think it changed the way you'll work as an artist going forward in terms of painting on a deadline, right? For instance, I don't know what your process was before you did this.
So I don't know that I would rush to do that again. I definitely not for a little bit, but you know, there are always deadlines. Like if there's a gallery that's having an exhibit and it's a specific theme, like you'll have, you know, I would have to create something of that theme. But you know, I feel like having the deadline was good for then, but for now, like I now have a routine, you know what I mean? So I don't need the deadline to do the work, but it does make me think a lot about what's next in terms of having work that has a social purpose to it. It just, I don't know, it's just so much easier to focus. And I think that I will, I don't know when, but I will look for that kind of work, think about that kind of work.
A big part of the show are the photographs. There are 72 photographs. So were you a photographer before? And is this part of your process also as a painter?
Yeah, so I you know, in college I did a lot of photography classes. Cameras have changed a lot since then, and I was a little rusty, but I love taking photos, and I love taking photos of people. And so you know, when I was in school and I would do portraits of people, they were done from life. So that is not really possible because someone would have to sit for a very, very long time. And you know, it just wouldn't be possible to get as many people to do that. So I knew that photography was going to have to be part of my process. And it's a challenge, you know, honestly, to make a painting from a photograph, because a photograph distorts the image a lot. And you have to know in your, like conceptually, that distortion is a distortion, and then you have to kind of fix it. And so I'm still struggling with that, and I'm thinking about that, but I will continue to have photography be part of my process. Yeah.
So one of the things I remember you saying was you were delighted at all the people you were meeting. You said, I'm meeting the most interesting people. So I wanted to ask you, you know, to talk a little bit about that and what surprised you about the people you met along the way.
Yeah. So I just like went full throttle into this project, knowing that obviously I was going to have to get people to volunteer to spend a half hour with me and let me do a photo shoot. But I don't know, I just was like, didn't think about it. And then once I started to meet the people, I mean, the people who volunteered actually to participate mostly were people I had never met before. Very few people that I knew were the people who volunteered. So what was great was that I was meeting all these different people, and we were talking about gardening, which I love. And I was amazed at how they were able to grow amazing stuff in crazy spaces. I mean, Larchmont is not, it's like, we're not in the country, and it's like, this is people living in a village, and they live on like land that could be really rocky. There's no sun. I mean, I don't know, but people would plant on rocks and in pots. And I love seeing like their little slice of earth become so, you know, a garden. So, and some of them didn't have any, and they were so excited to talk about gardening and to talk about their garden and the history of some of the plants. I mean, there were people who, there was one woman who had like a line of rhubarb, and the rhubarb seeds came from her grandfather's plants that she brought to her garden. And someone else had a fig tree that came from a cutting from their father's fig tree. And then hearing their stories about when they started gardening, and some people were like novice gardeners. They had never gardened before, but they loved the idea, and they loved the idea also of doing something they could do with their kids. So seeing, like, they were so excited, like, oh my God, I grew this, and it was because gardening can be hard, but it can also just be so easy. Like it's amazing. And I also saw the most spectacular garden was somebody who said, yeah, come over to see my garden. It's on my roof. And I was like, okay. So I went over and we climbed out of a window onto his roof, and the roof was huge. It was like the size of this room. And for those of you who are joining us on Zoom, it's a big room. And it just went on and on and on. And he had so many different plants that he was growing in containers on his roof. I mean, I just loved it. And I just loved connecting with all these people that I had never known before.
And they were here, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to know, so one of the things people used to say to me is, I feel incentivized to grow because I'm growing for people who need food. And the Hunger Task Force at the time of 2020 and COVID was feeding about 800 families a week. You may have driven by the church in Larchmont or over in Columbus Park in Mamaroneck and seen giant, lines of bags of, Fresh Direct bags filled with stuff that was being donated by grocery stores or, food companies. And I was myself pretty shocked actually about how many families are being fed. So I wondered if you had any of that, if you knew that going into this, if that was surprising.
So I had heard of the Hunger Task Force and donated and, year for years. But I did have the opportunity to go and photograph during the times that they were picking up the food, and that we were, Lisa, you were basically setting out an amazing farm stand filled with all of the amazing produce and herbs that the farmers grew. And it looked like a farm stand that you go to on a Saturday morning, but everything was free. And again, this was during COVID, and it was outside. And then towards the end, it was right after Hurricane Ida, and as many of you know, our area was really devastated by that, and it made it like all the more important to have food to give to people who needed it. And so what really struck me is how excited everyone was to get all this fresh produce, because the other food that they are able to get through the amazing work of the task force is like boxed and canned, and it's not fresh. And so everyone was so excited to get this fresh food that their neighbors grew. So that I think about too, is that it's just so hard to get good, fresh, healthy food to people who need it.
Right. And you, as I recall, went over there and photographed some of the people and talked to some of the people who were in the line to pick up the
Some of the photographs.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to talk about something about the art. So you mentioned this at the beginning. You're doing a mix of landscape, still life, and portraiture, right? So going back and forth as an artist, like, is that challenging? And I'm just trying to imagine what that must be. You get into a a groove and then you suddenly,
Yeah, it's definitely challenging. I mean, you know, in these paintings, I definitely spend most of the time on the portrait, on the person, trying to get the features right to look like the person and the proportions right, because, you know, that's what a viewer is going to look at first is the person. You know, we're people and we're just drawn to looking at people. And that's part of the reason why I really like doing figurative art and I like looking at figurative art is because there's that connection, that emotional connection to seeing a person. So I spend a lot of time with that. And you know, the school that I went to, that was our training is we were trained in how to draw and paint the figure, human figure. So the plants and you know, the other stuff in the painting, in some ways are secondary, but in some ways were really interesting to me because I, again, wasn't as trained in it. And it's also like, oh my God, you're going to draw or paint a plant. There's so many leaves, you're going to do each leaf. Like, so I had to think about doing it like getting the essence of a plant. And so that was, and it is a different process and something I'm still grappling with. So the landscape is really important in these paintings because it's part of the whole theme. And it's also, you know, hard. And it's also, I think, what is hard, the most hard about painting is making a painting, right? Because yeah, the proportions are important and the, well, you know, it has to be believable and I'm a realist painter, so it has to really look like it, but it has to be a painting that someone is going to think works and is pretty and it has an emotional, you know, significance and it's and to make a painting, well, that's even harder because then you have to think of color and composition and you know, just so many other things. So you know, a lot goes into it and it's more than just one thing.
right, right. Are there ways in which this project you did change to and will change you going forward?
Sure. Well, it definitely made me a better painter, a more confident painter. You know, again, the idea of making a painting, like that was like at the fore, and that was something that I hadn't been thinking about as much in my other work. You know, it was more of getting the proportions right or making something look three-dimensional. But now I just started to think about, and I will continue to think about, you know, making a painting. So I grew, I think, during this year a lot as a painter, and it also made me, like we were just talking about, think a lot about the idea of art as a social, to have a social purpose and the connection of them. It definitely made me think about that, and it also, this project made me, although I always knew, but to really be able to see it, like how a community, like how important community is, and not just because we're like literally feeding our community, but as an artist, like my job is so solitary, and I, you know, yeah, I did all those paintings and I did all those photographs, but this whole exhibit, this could never have happened without the help of so many people. Like I had support from my family, I had so much help from my relatives and friends, and so community is just everything.
Right. Last question. I wonder if you know what's next for you, painting or gardening wise.
Well, gardening, I'll be honest, I have spent absolutely no time thinking about my garden because I've been like so consumed with this. So if I get a tomato plant and a zucchini plant in my garden, I'm done. I'm happy.
I'll get you one.
Okay, okay. And painting, like what's next? So I think about a lot of things, and one of them is to continue this project, like doing it somewhere else. Wouldn't it be interesting to document the farmers who are planting things in New York City? Like, what is that like? So that's interesting to me and something that I may do at some point. I'm also thinking about exploring landscape, just for, like the landscape without people in them, because I'm interested in like how to talk about the environment through landscape, maybe landscapes that are like critical to preserving the earth. And so I'm thinking about that. I'm also thinking about doing something with a lot of old photographs. So I have a lot of ideas.
Cool.
And we'll see.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Are there any questions in the audience or on the Zoom? Yep. Hi.
I was wondering how you picked the subjects that you chose to paint. Essentially, you've met with a lot of different people.
Yeah. How did I pick the subjects? How did I decide which people I was going to paint, right? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's an interesting question. And I will say that I feel like I didn't have enough time. There were so many people I wanted to paint. I wish I could have painted everyone. But there was something about, I think it was the lighting, the photos I was able to get. And, I know you're a photographer as well. And so I had difficulty because sometimes it was so bright. Like I could only really shoot great photographs at the beginning of the day, very beginning of the day, or the end of the day, because the areas that they were planting in were so bright, right? And so part of it was the quality of the photograph. It may have been an expression that somebody had. I wanted to get a cross section of like, I wanted some men, some women, some, older people, younger people. So I thought about that. But I will say that I have, like, there were so many people I wanted to paint, I just didn't get to. So.
Are you thinking about putting a book together of both the photographs and the art?
So the question is she thinking about putting a book together?
I did think of that. I did think, yeah, that would be cool. But I just thought about it. Oh, I don't know. I wish that I had more paintings. Maybe I'll keep painting and someday put a book together. Lori.
I was wondering, how long does it generally take you, like, to kind of get faster as you went on to finish painting? Do you work on more than one painting at a time, or do you just focus on one? And this final question related is inspired by a question my son asked when we took him when he was 4 years old to a plein air painting on Mother's Day. And he went up to the artist and he said, "Where do you start? What part of the face do you start with? And is that something you learned in school, or is that like an intuitive feeling for you as an artist? Like, how do you take that photograph, turn it into a painting?"
Okay. So this question is like 4 questions. So first of all, the question was, how long does it typically take to make a painting? And did I get faster? And then where, how
One at a time.
do I do one at a time, or do I work on a bunch of them at the same time? So I'll start with that. So, the first painting in this series was the painting I did of my sister-in-law, Sue. And that was the biggest painting that I did. And it's like 48 inches by 48 inches. And it was bigger than I've ever worked before. And so because of the size of that painting, and because Sue was nice enough to wear a very difficult shirt to paint, that painting took me a month. And that was the longest I spent on any of these paintings. That said, the size definitely affects how long it takes to make a painting. And the larger paintings just take longer. And so the smaller paintings can take a lot shorter time. And it has also to do with whether just things flow. I mean, I don't know, like sometimes things flow and sometimes it's a struggle. And, you know, I talk about this a lot, and you definitely get faster as you get to be a better painter, but a painting takes as long as it takes, is the kind of answer people give. I typically finish one painting before I start the next painting, but I always put the paintings somewhere else in my house that's not my studio, and I look at them. And my family thinks I'm crazy because I literally just sit in front of these paintings for like I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll go get you that glass of water. And I could be gone for like 40 minutes. And they're like, where'd she go? I am just sitting there staring at my paintings. And they're like, oh my God, enough. But it's so important because it like takes a long time to see that something isn't quite right, or like there's something that nags at me. And then I'm like done with a painting, right? I'm done. And the next thing you know, well, that painting is back in my studio because it just nagged at me. So I'm done, but I'm not done. So in that way, I'm working on more than one painting. And I'm always thinking about, sometimes I take the paintings, and in this instance, I definitely did, and I put them near each other. And one painting is talking to another painting and saying, I'm better than you. And that hand is not as good as my hand. So then I'm like, oh, well, I'm going to take that painting back and fix it to look as good as the next, you know, the last painting I did. So in that sense, I'm working on more than one painting. And then the other question was, what is my process? How do I begin? How do I take a photograph that I think is right for a painting and make it into a painting? So I do a lot of things, and each painting I do something a little different, but sometimes I know that photograph, there's a lot of things in it that just should not be. And sometimes I take it and I paint over the photograph, the actual photograph. I'll print it out and I paint over it to get rid of those areas, to change colors. Sometimes I put it in a computer program called Photoshop, and I'll change colors and try to manipulate it that way. And sometimes I draw first, and so that the composition is right, and there's enough lights and there's enough darks, and it just is going to work as a painting, because it's something that works as a photograph doesn't necessarily work as a painting. And then when I'm ready, I'll do typically, especially for the big ones, I'll do a color study. So I get the colors right on a painting to see, okay, how's this going to work as a painting? And I use that color study as a reference throughout, like to keep coming back to the color study. Well, if it worked in the color study and it's not working in my painting, why? Or sometimes I change it in the painting, but I think about like always starting out with an idea of how, like, you can't just go on the canvas and just start painting. So that's how I start. And I typically, for these, because the landscape was such a part of it, I do like a first pass on a lot of it. Like sometimes I'll do a first pass on the whole person, and then I'll go back and finish that person to make it like sing, you know, whatever. And then I'll go put in the landscape, and I'll go back to the person, and I'll go back to the landscape. But it's like a give and take, because every mark you put on the canvas changes it. So I could like put some green somewhere, and then it's like, oh my God, well, now that face doesn't look right. Now I got to redo the face. I mean, it really is like something, it's like an all over for me, and not every artist works this way, but for me, it's like I'm working that whole canvas over and over. I hope that was okay.
There was a question over there in the back. Yeah.
Yeah, can we talk about who are the artists that influenced you maybe at the beginning, through the process, and
who you look to now when you think about your work going forward? Is there anybody sort of percolating in your head that you think you've taken something from or? Yeah. Influenced by? So that question was, are there artists that I'm influenced by? And so, yeah, I mean, I'm really influenced by, I mean, and I think like for any artist, you really have to study art, you know, because you just learn so much from what other artists have done. And so very influenced and always was very influenced by John Singer Sargent. I am also very influenced by a lot of contemporary painters. Zoe Frank is one that I follow and influenced by her. And Jordan Castile is another contemporary painter who is also a figurative painter. She does portraits and I'm very influenced by her work. I'm also, you know, trying to look at people who do plants, and Jordan Castile also is a gardener, and she does her garden as well. But Frances Sills is somebody that I look at, and Christina Weaver. Some of my instructors have also been hugely influential, Manu Saluja and Dean Fisher. So I'm always looking at artists and Nicholas Sanchez is another person that I look at a lot, and it keeps changing because I keep finding, you know, there's so many great painters out there. Judy.
I live in a town that has a interreligious community garden that's open to anybody in the town that wants to plant there. And I thought it was a good idea, and it is a very successful idea. But I like your idea even better because you pick people who are using your own property. It's theirs. It has a much deeper connection to them. And I think they can put more into it than if it's one garden for the whole town that they just have a part of. I like the idea that it's their own space.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that. You know, when I thought about this, I thought about where we live. People have tried to start a community garden in this community, and it's hard. The green space we have here is used for parks or for recreation, right? So it's just hard to get it going here. And people have small lots. The yards are not big here. And so what I imagined was it was sort of like a suburban farm that stretched over, you know, all these properties, which I thought was kind of like when I read that story in the Times, I thought, oh, this is totally doable. The other thing I thought about, because I've been a gardener for a long time, is that I often feel that gardening can be incredibly intimidating. And that, you know, that expression, perfect is the enemy of good. That's my mantra with this. I think that you build if you can do a little 2x4 raised bed in your backyard and go to Home Depot and get seedlings and put them in the ground and grow stuff and produce things, that's amazing. It's very satisfying. It's just, and there's no high pressure, there's no competition, you know. I also would tell people would often write me and say, oh, I only have 3 tomatoes. I only have parsley. And I would say, well, bring 3 tomatoes, you know, because of course, if 140 people brought 3 tomatoes, suddenly we have these big buckets of tomatoes. It all added up, and people would come, and I'd get a little baggie sometimes of something, and then I'd get, you know, 10 pounds of cucumbers from another person. So I think one of the things that's nice about having it at your own house is it just takes the pressure off, right? You just do what makes you happy in your own space.
So just adding on to that, so have you thought about it? I mean, it's such an amazing project, and you could not have had a better artist in Stacey or person to try to make it come to life and visualize for us to be able to see in the exhibit what amazing work was done. But have you tried to or thought about replication of this and making it a scalable project? Because, you know, it's a big project and I can only imagine the time, but even within Westchester, you know, we live 30 minutes north. I'm not a good gardener, but if somebody came to my community and said, let's start this, sure, you know, I could do it. Have you thought at all about that?
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about it, and it's weirdly easy. It just works. There's no money exchange, there's no profit. People do what they, you know, you need somebody to organize people, and you need an organization to grow for. I think that's important. They'll accept your stuff. You also need, I realized, high school juniors who need community service on their applications for college, because in the summer they collect all the stuff and take it over to the food pantry and give it out. They also help. There's a big garden in town at Murray Avenue School. It's a beautiful garden. Carrie McKinney, who's part of the group, manages it. She allows them to pick there. It's great for the plants there, you know, great for the production, and they weed. They also help refurbish beds at Sheldrake. So, like, to me, you need an organization who will take your food. You need high school juniors, and you need Google spreadsheet, and you need somebody who can organize people. I would be very happy to talk to you about this if you want to try it, because it's surprisingly easy.
Yeah, but you've made it easy, like, because of how, you know, I had a zillion questions, you know, I kept shooting off to you last year, and it was always, the energy behind your answers was always, try it, do what you can, I want whatever you can, you know, it was never like, you as the sort of stronghold of all this made it, it makes it much easier for everybody else to sort of not second guess what they're doing and not be shy about asking or bringing their 3 tomatoes or whatever that is. So I guess it's easy, but you make it easier for everybody else.
Thanks for saying that. But again, I think that what I said before is really true. It's like perfect. You know, there are many beautiful, perfect gardens in the world, right? Like, yeah, I sometimes go to gardens and I just, you know, cannot believe what this person has achieved, both in terms of form and function, right? But we really, it doesn't have to be that way. And if you approach it that way, you'll never probably, you'll give it up. You know, you'll just say, I couldn't do it. I failed. It's just, you just have to have some soil that'll grow the food and put a little, you know, amendment in there and plant and in the sun. You know, it's really like, and a number of people said to me, the fact that I was doing it as part of a group really made me feel like want to keep going, right? They liked the communal feeling. And you know, by the way, a lot of these people never met each other because we couldn't congregate during COVID. You know, we were all on an email chain. We use my restaurant as a staging ground for people to come pick up seedlings, drop off food, whatever, and they would run into each other. But this was the first year that I could even try to get the 140 families together. Maybe we will. So the part of the reasoning behind the art project was that I was hoping that we were hoping that people from other communities will come and see it and get an idea, like, this is such a great idea, we could do it. And my friend Jocelyn, who asked the question, who grew up across the street from me, I will say, she lives in Armonk. And so, yeah, like, we hope that people think of this as a great idea and will think about doing it. And of course, you know, Lisa has, you know, created this way to do it and would be, I'm sure, so happy to share that. So,
have you thought about doing this like as a traveling exhibit in order to sort of inspire other communities to do the same thing?
yeah, that's a great idea. I don't know. We'll see.
Along with the book that you're gonna make.
The book and the traveling exhibit, yeah,
And the manual to do it.
yeah. After the graduation,
Yeah.
yeah. To graduate. To graduate, yes, yeah.
I love vegetables and I love flowers and I've been growing them for a while. And I just wanted a shout out to Lisa for working. Because I'm trying to remember how I first found out about it. I think it was maybe from my neighbor Clay initially, maybe Nina.
Maybe
both
Nina,
of you at the
yeah.
same time. When I got that email and I saw what you were doing, it was just like, this is what we need in this community. This is what all gardeners, it sort of touched a nerve for me. So it felt like the next right level to take our garden to is to share our bounty. And I think that's one of the most important things that you've helped us to do.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
so.
Stacey, for it's just, it's a beautiful project. And thank you.
So for those of you on Zoom who didn't hear, that was such a nice shout out to Lisa, Lisa Chase, for organizing such a great project that has like literally nourished so many people, the people who grow and the people who were lucky to get all this produce.
So there are no questions in the chat, so if we have no more questions, big thank you to Stacey and Lisa. Thanks, guys.